Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday and welcome to today's eLotus webinar. I have a question for you all. How many of you have treated patients with anxiety, insomnia, or emotional distress and wished you had more tools to help calm the mind and restore balance? If so, please type yes in the chat room. My name is Myra Chen and I'm your host and moderator for today's eLotus webinar. Here at eLotus, we have been hosting educational courses for over 3 decades, and we are proud to be your trusted source for premium CEU content. With over 200 speakers, 700 courses, and 3,000 hours of CE. We truly appreciate you all for joining us today. Today's class is Acupuncture for Anxiety, an effective Chinese medicine approach to healing the mind, sponsored by Evergreen Herbs. You will learn how to identify the underlying root causes, design effective acupuncture treatments, and incorporate dietary therapy and Qigong to support emotional balance and enhance long-term results. By the end of this course, you will have the practical tools to help your patients cultivate greater calm, resilience, and well-being. We're honored to have Marc Mastrandrea with us today, an expert with a fascinating background that blends deep understanding of Eastern philosophy, Chinese medicine, and martial arts. Marc is no stranger to high-volume clinical settings. He founded and operated Po Chi Lam Clinic, a bustling clinic that treated a wide range of medical conditions. After closing his clinic in 2016, Marc moved to Beijing, immersing himself in the study of Chinese language, culture, and Baguazhang. His experiences at Guohitang Hospital in Beijing gave him a front-row seat to the early stages of the global pandemic, which later brought him back to the US to land his expertise where it was needed most. Marc also recently completed his own studies of the complete Shan Hun Lin textbook in its original traditional Chinese text in Taiwan this past year. How impressive is that? And as many of you may already know, Marc has been teaching with eLotus for several years and has built an impressive collection of courses that are both clinically practical and deeply insightful, including acupuncture for wind-being diseases, channel theories for treating pain, Shan Hun Lin acupuncture, and more. In addition, Marc has another webinar with us later on this year titled Acupuncture for Depression, an effective Chinese medicine approach to healing the mind on May 7th. It's the perfect complement to today's topic. His compassionate, clear, and clinically grounded approach makes his teachings highly applicable to everyday practice. I will share links to all of his classes in the chat room shortly so you can explore them further. And lastly, a quick reminder for any new attendees joining us today. Please make sure to set your chat from host and panelists to everyone so we can all be part of the conversation. To submit any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A box so they remain organized and easy for us to answer. If you're here live and can both see the chat room and hear the presentation, your attendance is already being tracked. Just be sure to stay until the end of the webinar to qualify for the CEU quiz. A notification with directions on how to access the quiz will be sent to the email associated with your eLotus account when the quiz is available within 24 hours. Now, let's begin today's webinar, and please join me in welcoming Marc Mastrandrea. Welcome, Marc.
Hi, let me just figure out how to share this real quick
Of course,
and we'll get started. Sorry about that.
of course. Thank you for
Uh,
joining us from Taiwan.
no
So
problem.
excited for your class.
I'm excited to be here. Let me pull up this final PowerPoint that here we go. All right. Here. And this looks like it. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes. And
All right.
then
And then this, correct? Boom.
perfect.
All right. All righty. Well, welcome this morning, everybody. I'm glad you guys could be here. It's kind of early for me. I've been up, it's very early here in Taipei, so we're getting started. I got my tea and my hot water ready. So let's get into today's class. So some of you guys know me, maybe from before, maybe some of you guys don't. My name is Marc Mastrandrea. Uh, Myra did a great job with her introduction. Um, Today we're going to talk about anxiety. Now, when Tina approached me about doing new classes, I said, what do you want me to do? And she goes, well, let's do stuff that people are always coming up against. So she offered the idea of anxiety and depression, and that's going to be the lead for these next two classes. So this class and the one in May. But I realized that unlike other classes where I teach about treating infectious disease and all these other things, this class really also needed to be about the physician, like, because everybody goes through anxiety, right? And so having tools that you can use in your own life to help yourself, right, is very, very important. Because if you have a difficult time transforming anxiety or problems like this in yourself, you're going to have a lot of problems transforming this in patients. And so one of the things we want to look at is generationally why this has gotten worse, right? Because this has gotten a lot worse, particularly in Gen Z, as you'll see in a lot of the statistics I show. Gen Z is the worst uh, generation with anxiety by far and large, and it's leading to excessive problems in mental health, suicide rates, and things like that. So let's get into this and see what we're doing here. So anxiety, right? And as you guys know, anybody who's taken my classes, I write extensive PowerPoints. Not really because I need to, but more because I want you guys to be able to take this and work with it. And it just makes it easier for the class to flow, right? So anxiety is extremely common. It's extremely common, particularly among those who are continuously connected to their phones, their computers, their social media, their TVs, news cycles that are constantly going, right? All of this is just an anxiety cycle, an anxiety cycle with other people telling you how to feel, whether you should be upset over something, whether you shouldn't be upset over something, whether you should be joining them in this cause, you know, and this people fall into this. And the problem is that with newer generations, right, they have no experience of a life without this. For those people who have been alive since the 1990s, it's weird saying this, but we didn't have this continuous connection before, right? But this continuous connection with, we call it a connection, we think it's a good thing, but in many cases, if it's connection to something that is trying to control your thoughts, make you feel a certain way, make you feel bad if you don't feel a certain way, this creates an anxiety. You know, having an image online, having an image you project to other people, that is, you're constantly being viewed. This will create constant heat, constant anxiety, right? And so this is very, very common in the last 20 years, 20, 25 years. Uh, Generational anxiety and depression is on the rise. What do I mean by generational anxiety and depression? Anxiety, let's go back. Anxiety has been continually increasing by generation. I'm trying to see here how I can just move this chat here out of the way a little bit. Let me see. There we go. That's better. Okay. Um, it's been continuously increasing. The largest increase is among Gen Z, right? It's also, like I said, the group that's never been without internet. Right? My youngest brother is Gen Z, and I'm a millennial, right? He was born in 2000, so he's like the beginning cusp of Gen Z. He doesn't know, thankfully, growing up, we didn't have cell phones for him to use, but he's never known a life without the internet. Uh, and this is a major thing, right? You get this, and because you start very young, you get this addiction to the screen, right? People need this interaction. They've never known a life without this, right? And this is a really, really, really big thing, not just among Gen Z in the idea of addiction to screen devices, but particularly because they've never known a life without it, many of them, then it creates this. So the rates of anxiety, depression, and self-harm and suicide are significantly higher in Gen Z, right? A Gallup survey in 2023 showed that Gen Z, people between the ages of 12 to 26, are found to be have 40% of these people are found to often have feelings of anxiety, right? 2021, a CDC youth risk behavior survey, this is during the pandemic, right? Showed that 42% of Gen Z high schoolers show feelings of persistent hopelessness and sadness. This is 50% higher than the previous generation, which was already higher than the generation before that, right? So these things keep going up. Uh, so this is a real problem, right? Sorry, let me just close the chat here. So this is a major issue, right? And this is going to be complicated by other things, including um, social pressures, right? We have certain developmental disorders now that are very much on the rise. There's no denying that things like autism and stuff are on the rise. And the idea that, oh, this was never reported before. No, it was reported. There were aspects, but this has significantly been on the rise now, right? And a lot of this has to do with our changing environment, right? So anxiety, though, we act like today, oh, we're in a terrible place. Oh, I hate my country, right? A lot of times social media happens to promote, especially in the West, the idea of like having a lot of pessimism towards one's place, one's country, one's life, one's family, right? You see it in the East too. I live out here in the East. You see it too. But in, say, countries like China, the social media is heavily controlled by the government. So you're not allowed to necessarily be uh, uh, negative or critical of the government in the same way. I'm not saying that criticism of the government is bad, right? But the idea of propaganda and things that promote the idea that you live in the worst possible time. Oh my God, this is awful. You know, all these things. Historically, we're actually at one of the most peaceful points in human history because generally, if you look at history, war, violence, famine, all these things, this is real PTSD. You know, people experience their family being wiped out, famine killing people. This is real, palpable PTSD, right? Not necessarily watching something on your phone, but and then feeling anxious because your friend group isn't accepting you, but having, most of your family wiped out due to some sort of famine and then scourge of some disease. This would create that. But these people seem to have moved through this, right? However, today, anxiety and depression seems to be higher in the modern population than was reported in the past. And this isn't because, oh, we didn't have the numbers in the past. That's a rather an ignorant statement because obviously people were writing about anxiety for a long time. But how come today in children, in young people, it is much higher, right? This is a major problem. And a lot of it can be connected to the way we live our modern lifestyles with constant stimulation from screen devices and social media and constant news cycles, right? So the largest difference is a convergence of social and technological changes, right? That have become very invasive and heavily influential to the point where people cannot escape these things to even be alone with their own thoughts. This, in my opinion, is not only just my opinion, psychologists as well, is one of the most important things. People aren't alone with their own thoughts. They have to pick up a phone. They have to look at a computer. They have to be engaged with something that is not themselves. They have to be engaged outside, and this is kind of forced on them with our society, right? And when you're not allowed to be alone with your own thoughts, this heavily affects the person, right? It heavily affects their mental state and what they're going through. And so what happens is they can never think deeply about their life. They can never have their own developmental thoughts now. And in the age of AI, it's becoming worse because now you're asking a computer what you should feel because you've been slowly sort of brainwashed to think of the idea of having first through social media asking other people what to feel, and then the idea of afterwards AI asking the computer what to feel. So it's sort of a step-by-step diminishment of what's going on, right? And so this can create a lot of problems within people, right? Particularly within the youth, right? All right, let's see. So, however, we do know this that emotions have their reasons, right? You shouldn't discount emotions. Doesn't mean that emotions or people's moods aren't exactly real in the sense of what I mean by that is like you feel threatened because somebody raised their voice, but it doesn't mean that the person is threatening you, right? So there's an importance to understanding the reality of a situation, but also your emotions. But then look to see why those emotions are happening. Because if somebody is feeling anxious, there's reasons why they're feeling anxious, is what I mean. Now, they might not be able to handle the reality of the situation. And so their mind, their anxiety, their adrenaline ramps up, and it doesn't need to ramp up that much, right? It doesn't mean that just because they're anxious that the anxious feelings that they're feeling or the quote unquote PTSD they're claiming is legitimate for the situation, but maybe they haven't learned how to regulate their emotions because modern society, particularly if they're younger, hasn't taught them how to sit with their feelings and think about them. Instead, the minute they're going to sit down, they look at something. They look at a screen and something like when I was growing up, when my parents were growing up, right? You didn't feel good? Go out for a run. Go take a walk in the woods. People don't do that. What do they do now? They go to the couch, they look at their phone, and they go down a rabbit hole, right? And they look for things that validate the way they feel instead of thinking about that stuff in a walk or a run alone, right? Talking to friends obviously is similar to social media, but it's different than having people who don't know you and don't know your situation validate the way you feel, which could in some cases be not true or not correct. But this can ramp up these things in people who have never sat and thought about their situation deeply, right? But it doesn't mean their emotions are invalid. It just means they could be misplaced or misunderstood, right? So look to see if these are passing moods or if they're actually emotions, right? Emotions are rooted in reactions to people's environments. Now, reactions aren't always the suitable reaction to the environment, but they're still a reaction. So they're still a symptom. So from our point of view as physicians, right? Because I consider you guys physicians, you guys are physicians of Chinese medicine. You want to see where these reactions are rooted and why they're coming out. What is a person's environment like? You know, if the person is constantly looking at their phone, constantly looking at the computer, social media, asking AI how to deal with situations, and it's just a looping cycle that's just supporting something and not really helping them think through it, right? Because we all have seen these things where, you know, you can find self-validation that might not necessarily be accurate or healthy, then this perpetual cycle will keep creating these things. And this is one of the reasons for today's like anxiety, right? And one of the things you find in certain groups of young people is that if you don't validate them, validate their feelings, and for them, validation doesn't mean, okay, I hear what you're saying, even though I don't agree with you. Validation for many people is you have to agree with me. Otherwise, you don't validate me. And then they get more anxious over this, right? And these will result in, and are the results of, but will result in more pathology, right? And so the idea that has been kind of in a lot of therapy today is validation therapy is the idea of agreeing with somebody even though it might not be correct, right? Just to make them not feel so anxious isn't necessarily the right way to go, right? Because what it does is it further pushes somebody into not really thinking about that. Because sometimes the person is wrong. Everybody knows that, right? I could be wrong in the way I think, but if I'm constantly being validated in those feelings and reactions, then what happens is it further pushes these thoughts, these feelings in a direction. It doesn't mean that the emotions aren't a reaction to the environment. They absolutely are. But maybe I've not thought about my emotions for long enough because all I've done is picked up devices that just further support my limited way of thinking instead of broadening it, right? And giving me a more mature, broader understanding of things.